Thank you to all of you that have joined us for the first town hall talk. For those of you that aren't already aware, this is part of the Lowestoft Town Hall project. The Town Hall project is a Lowestoft Town Council initiative to redevelop the town hall, and it's supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, as well as East Suffolk Council and the Towns Fund. Alongside the redevelopment programme, there's also a programme of activities and events that are being run by myself, the Heritage Project Manager, and also John, who's the Heritage Officer, who's just joined us in the last month. And I'll pass over to John now, who will introduce you to Jasmine. John, you're on mute.
So Dr. Jasmine Allen is Director and Curator of the Stained Glass Museum, the only museum dedicated to stained glass in the UK, located in Ely Cathedral. Jasmine has lectured and written about many aspects of stained glass for a variety of audiences. She is recognised as a specialist in her field. Jasmine plays an active role in promoting and preserving stained glass in the wider cultural and heritage sector. So, I thought I'd mention before we start, so there will be chance for questions at the end, and I'd like to ask if you can use the chat function. So that is at the bottom of the bar. So it's just if you click on more, and then there's Q&A. Sorry, did I say chat function? I meant Q&A. So if you go to the Q&A section, that's where you can ask questions. Yeah. Anyway, I'll pass over to Dr. Jasmine now. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jess. And thanks all of you for coming along this evening. I imagine that you're here because you're interested in finding out more about the history and heritage of Lowestoft. And whilst I'm not a local historian, I have written about the stained glass window in Lowestoft Town Hall, which some of you may have seen, and which I believe is a rare and important artwork and the topic of tonight's talk. So I'm sure that many of you here actually have additional information about the context of this window that I can learn from, and maybe the project can learn from too. So please do add any insights, corrections, comments or questions in the chat, or questions in the Q&A that I can answer or try and answer later. So stained glass is a unique art form, and I'm really fortunate to work with an extraordinary collection of stained glass day to day at the Stained Glass Museum located in Ely Cathedral, which of course you must all come and visit if you haven't already, and this is my obligatory tantalising slide to get you to all come and visit. But of course today talking about a window not in this collection but in Lowestoft Town Hall. Stained glass has often been, and remains today, generally associated with churches. However, it has actually always been part of the architectural decoration of secular buildings too. From the medieval period, the wealthy commissioned stained glass for their palaces and their estates. But the history of stained glass in secular settings is sometimes harder to trace because fewer windows or schemes survive in these settings. Often because these buildings have changed use and ownership several times over the course of history. In the 19th century, especially during the Victorian era here in Britain, stained glass became incredibly fashionable once again. And it was not only installed in churches and domestic settings, but also new secular spaces. So spaces that were used for educational, for leisure, or for civic purposes. Schools, libraries, theatres, pubs, hotels, and town halls. And I'm sure all of you can think of an example of going out for a meal in a Victorian pub or restaurant and having seen stained glass in the windows there. And the stories of these secular stained glass windows are generally little known, as scholars have tended to focus on stained glass in religious settings, and especially in Britain and in churches actually. But Lowestoft Town Hall is home to a particularly special stained glass window that I think is completely unique in its subject matter and of much historical interest. So here is the window in question, which was made 1854 to 55. And it's located at the west end of the council chamber of Lowestoft Town Hall, a building which many of you may be familiar with. You can see on the left there an outside picture. Here, showing you the location of the council chamber in the building, in the complex, and the window where it is in the west end of the hall. Someone put their hand up, but I hope everything is okay.
Hi, yeah, just to say, Jess has pointed out your slides are not showing, so
Actually, apologies, it was my settings. I can see them now. So I was just flying. Apologies, everybody, for the interruption.
Okay, I hope everyone else, if you're joining the webinar and you can't see slides, please do let us know. But I hope that you're moving forwards with me, because they're moving forwards for me. So here is the council chamber and within the town hall complex, and the window in situ. I have tried during this presentation to acknowledge all the photographs. Where they aren't acknowledged, please assume that they're either my own photos or those provided by the town hall project. So I hope to show you this evening that this window shines a light on a rapidly developing Lowestoft, as well as national and international relations in the mid-19th century. So we will pick apart this window over the course of the evening, not physically, but metaphorically speaking. And although this evening's talk focuses on this one window, we're actually going to be uncovering quite a range of historical topics, not only the development of Lowestoft Town, but also that of major Victorian monuments and buildings, including Nelson's Column and the Houses of Parliament, international exhibitions held in Paris, France, a medieval summit that took place in northern France in 1520, British-French political alliances during the reigns of the French Emperor Napoleon III and Queen Victoria, the Crimean War, and the development of the railways, not only in Britain, but internationally. And what or who connects all these things? Well, it's a local man that you will have likely heard of, Sir Samuel Morton Peto. Morton Peto, as I'm sure some of you will know, was an entrepreneur, a civil engineer, and a railway developer in the Victorian period. He established his reputation as one of the leading contractors for public works and railways in England from the 1830s until the 1860s. And actually, not only in England, but further afield too. Peto was for a time very wealthy and well connected. He served as a member of Parliament for more than 2 decades. He was MP for Norwich, 1847 to 54, MP for Finsbury, 1859 to 65, and MP for Bristol, 1865 to 68. And his clients included government as well as royals. And he left a mark on East Anglia in lots of ways, but notably through his development of the railway, and busts of Peto, portrait busts of Peto and plaques dedicated to him can be seen on a number of railway stations. So when you're travelling between Thorpe, Ely, Norwich, do look out for signs of Peto. There is a plaque at Ely station, which I see every time I come back from visiting another city. Peto resided at Somerleyton Hall, just 6 miles from Lowestoft, and he also helped to develop the village of Somerleyton, building a school and houses, as well as helping to develop Lowestoft Town, especially around the harbour and railway. He was involved in building a new pier, hotels, lodging houses, and a church. Indeed, he was often referred to in local newspapers as the father of modern Lowestoft. And although Morton Peto is neither named nor depicted in this window, which was designed by an artist called John Thomas and manufactured by Scottish firm Ballantyne and Sons, he is known to be the person who paid for and commissioned the window. He paid 700 guineas for the window, according to one newspaper. That's the equivalent, according to the internet, and I may be wrong in this, of around £730 today, which seems a bit too cheap. So someone can perhaps correct that maths. He likely commissioned it and donated it to the town hall. And there used to be, in the council chamber room, just to the right of a window, this bust of Peto, which I believe has now been moved to the museum collections. So that's the sort of sculptural bust that you need to look out for on your travels in East Anglia, along the railway and out and about in Lowestoft. And Peto is central to our interpretation of the window, its iconography and its symbolism. But before we begin to unpick the imagery in the window, let's just plot what we know of the window's history. So we know that the stained glass window was actually made several years before Lowestoft Town Hall was opened in 1860. The town hall opened in 1860, but we know that this window was exhibited at a grand event known as the Paris Exposition Universelle 5 years earlier in 1855. Yet the town hall, as you saw from those earlier photos, was clearly designed to accommodate this window, as it forms the centrepiece of the council chamber room. But it is possible, and I think probable actually, that the window itself was commissioned before the building was finalised, which is actually extremely unusual, because if you think about it, stained glass is often an architectural decoration, a kind of secondary part of the planning of a building, not the primary reason a building is put in, or often not planned before the stonework of the actual building is planned. So as well as this figurative window, which is really the window I'm going to focus on this evening at the west end of the chamber, there are also two additional stained glass windows. And I apologise because I don't have good photos of these. This is the best I have of one of them. But they're on either side, so they kind of flank the window on the north and south sides of the room. And I believe that these are slightly later in date. I think they are around 1860 when the building was built. They're quite different colouring, as you can see, and they're predominantly decorative glass. So they don't have figures in them. Instead, they have armorials and some inscriptions. And the armorials, or the heraldry, is actually Sir Samuel Morton Peto's heraldry, and also those of the town of Lowestoft. And I hope that perhaps John and Jess might actually furnish us with the inscriptions of these windows, maybe as a follow-up to this talk, because I couldn't read it on these photos, and it's been a while since I visited. But like I said, the figurative window is really the main focus of tonight's talk, although there's clearly an ensemble here, and Peto is involved in all three. And the figurative window was exhibited in Paris in 1855 at an international exhibition, as I said, known as the Exposition Universelle. And for those that don't know, the international exhibitions were these grand events that took place in the 19th century. They were quite, and into the 20th century. They were phenomenons of their time, really. They were ideological events that brought together exhibits from across the world in one place. And the exhibits were often divided into national displays, but grouped or classified by their type. So you could have international comparisons of, say, raw materials or artworks or industrial products, the latest kind of machinery or cloth made in factories from all around the world. So really quite grand events. I mean, I don't think anything quite like it has happened in my lifetime, since the Millennium Dome doesn't quite come near to the scale and cost and success, actually, of some of these events. So at the Exposition Universelle of 1855, and sorry, the hat project shouldn't be shown there. That's clearly from another slide. The exposition of 1855, all of the industrial exhibits, because there was another building housed dedicated to art, were housed in this building I'm showing you here, which was called the Palais de l'Industrie, the Industrial Palace. And this building was designed and erected solely for this exhibition. It was a very large building, intended to be a permanent structure. It had walls of cut stone, interior compartments of cast iron, and a very large plate glass roof made using the latest glass technology. And stained glass was one of thousands of different types of exhibits displayed in this building, all under one roof. And the stained glass was actually distributed across these pavilions. French exhibits were in the northern part of the building, and foreign exhibits, so from anywhere else in the world, were in the south. And of course, this exhibition was hosted by France, so there were always more French exhibits than other nations. So Peto's stained glass window, which, as we shall see, depicted an alliance between Britain and France, was a British exhibit made by a Scottish firm, and it was displayed within the British section of these displays, which, as you can see, were in various pavilions I've highlighted in red there. Now, this first Exposition Universelle of 1855 was a really important event for the French Republic. Following the success of the Great Exhibition, which was held in London 4 years earlier in 1851, the Exposition Universelle of 1855 redirected the world's attention to the Champs-Élysées in Paris, where the French had held national industrial expositions for a long time, since 1844 annually. And these national expositions were actually part of a long-standing tradition of French exhibitions that aimed to showcase industrial advancement and also stimulate the trade of French goods. But on this same site where these annual exhibitions were held, and certainly did attract international exhibition, those national exhibitions did, they were reported in the British press, on this site in 1855 was the first universal or international exhibition, where we had exhibits and exhibitors from all around the world. And Paris and the nation of France continued to hold international expositions, or Exposition Universelle, throughout the century, actually more than any other nation, at regular intervals. So there was exhibitions around and on this site in 1867, in 1878, in 1889, and in 1900. And this is an image of a panorama of the exhibition site in 1900. And I'm sure that you are looking at this picture and recognizing many of the landmarks of Paris. Familiar things like the Eiffel Tower, which was actually completed for the 1889 Exposition Universelle. Things like the metro signs that you're probably familiar with if you've been to Paris were also revealed in 1900 for the Exposition Universelle of 1900. And during preparations for the 1900 exhibition, an exhibition which celebrated the dawning of a new 20th century, but also looked back on a century of progress in the industrial 19th century, the 1855 Palais de l'Industrie building that we talked about was actually demolished, and in its place, in the bottom right-hand corner here, was built the Grand Palais and Petit Palais, which still stand today and host exhibitions. So this slide and image, I hope, demonstrates how vast these exhibitions were, but also how important they were in the construction of major cities like Paris, because we couldn't conceive of Paris as we know it today without the international exhibitions, which actually created many of these landmarks and the kind of tourist flow that we have today. So as I said, France was not the only nation to hold international exhibitions. London, of course, saw the first World's International Exhibition when the Crystal Palace was erected in Hyde Park. But France was really the only nation to hold successive large-scale exhibitions at regular intervals. And these were used often as a mechanism for political propaganda. They were, in effect, stages from which quite large and complex displays of French nationalism were performed to an international audience. And significantly, the 1855 Exposition Universelle also marked the dawn of Napoleon III's reign as emperor, and took place during the Crimean War. And the exposition became the centre for expressions of a friendly alliance, or entente cordiale, between Britain and France, who were allies in the Crimean campaign against Russia, which took place between 1853 and 1856. So bear that in mind, we will come back to that. But it is unsurprising, given that Anglo-French alliance and also friendly competition, that several exhibits at the 1855 exhibition actually referred to this relationship between the French and British empires. And one of the most interesting of these was this stained glass window, which is now in Lowestoft Town Hall, and as we've said, was exhibited at this exhibition by the stained glass makers Ballantyne and Sons. Peto clearly commissioned the window, and I've alluded to the fact that we're not quite sure, and maybe someone knows who's on this talk tonight, whether the window was commissioned with Lowestoft Town Hall in mind. It certainly wasn't ever installed in Peto's home at Somerleyton Hall, as far as we know. Somerleyton Hall, as many of you will know, is a large estate near Lowestoft, which Peto purchased in 1844. And he made several kind of extensions and improvements to the building. And interestingly, Ballantyne and Sons, who made the window at the town hall, were also employed to create various stained glass pieces for the property around the same time, actually, 1854 to 55, that this window was commissioned. There is a wonderful stained glass ceiling as part of this building, which is still there and quite rare. So if you get a chance to go on a tour of Somerleyton Hall, do. It's a really wonderful place. So rather than being commissioned for his own residence, and perhaps the town hall development was in his mind, we're not sure. It does seem that the unique iconography of the window that celebrates the political alliance between Britain and France suggests that it may have actually been commissioned especially for the Exposition Universelle of 1855. Peto himself was no stranger to the international exhibitions. He had played a really important part in the organisation and promotion of the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London. He had acted as a guarantor for £50,000, a big sum, for the building of Paxton's Crystal Palace. And he was subsequently made a Royal Commissioner for the exhibition and acted as Treasurer for the Finance Committee. And as you can see here, he's very, very prominently depicted in this painting by Henry Courtney Selous, which depicts the opening of the Great Exhibition. And you can see he's on the front left there, very much in the foreground. Actually, the royals are further back than he is. And there's a close-up here that you can see. So the stained glass window at Lowestoft Town Hall, which was exhibited in Paris 4 years after this event, seems to be explicitly related to the 1855 exhibition. And it gives us an opportunity to think about the role of Peto as an agent of internationalism, if you like, and to demonstrate the ways in which these exhibitions lent themselves to artistic depictions of national prowess, international rivalry, and imperial alliances. So let's turn now to look at the iconography of this window. The large standing figures on the left and the right are the patron saints of France and England, Saint Denis and Saint George, presented here as the guardians of Europe, and that's what the inscription says. They are set on small Renaissance-style pedestals in traditional architectural niches decorated with scallop shells and surrounded by Renaissance-style ornament, with the inscription, "Hail, Happy Union," above. And in between these two saints is a depiction of the famous tournament of the Field of the Cloth of Gold. And we'll return to that in a moment. Directly above this scene, at the top of the window, the words "Forever United" are written on a scroll. A winged cherub, which contemporary reports suggest represents peace, so it's an allegorical figure, holds a crown over two double cameo portraits of Victoria and her consort Albert on the right, and Napoleon and the Princess Eugenie on the left. And these cameo portraits are enclosed in laurel wreaths, and each supported by a cherub holding a cornucopia, that's that funny kind of corn shape, a horn of plenty, where you can see flowers and fruits spilling out, with symbols of art, music, and industry around, which kind of reflect the aims and ideas of the international exhibitions. That balance of art and industry, where you can see there's a palette, painter's palette on the left, just next to the cornucopia on the left, and on the right, a kind of cog, a mechanic cog on the right. Symbols of art and industry like that were very, very common in the buildings of these international exhibitions, which were aimed to unite art and industry through their exhibits. And in the lower register, the French and British flags with a fleur-de-lis sceptre and a sword are crossed in a sign of friendship, surmounted by a crown and set against what appears to be olive branches. Again, another symbol of peace. And these flags are flanked, so on either side, by the arms of Napoleon III and Queen Victoria. And the borders of the window are adorned by fleur-de-lis and Tudor roses, the royal symbols of France and England. And also the date, which you can see there, AD 1855. So they are all the elements, and I think you probably agree with me here that we've got some strong themes. So let's return to this tournament, this inclusion of the famous tournament, the Field of the Cloth of Gold, which is, if you remember, in that oval-shaped frame at the centre of the window. This event is really significant in the history of Anglo-French relations. For those that don't know, it's a really fascinating piece of history that I hope you'll go away and read more about. The tournament marked a meeting between Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France in June 1520 in a valley in the Pale of Calais, which at that time was English territory, but today is northern France. The two kings and their entourages met and jousted and feasted and danced together for 17 days. Elaborate and expensive temporary quarters were erected. Indeed, the sumptuous and lavish gold materials provided the name with which we now remember the event, the Field of the Cloth of Gold. So the young kings, Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France, actually met to affirm two agreements following the Treaty of London in 1518. Firstly, a treaty of perpetual friendship, so a general agreement that we're going to be friends and allies. And secondly, which is really an extension of this, a marriage alliance between the two infants, the Dauphin Francis, heir to the French throne, and Princess Mary, who, bless them, were then only aged 2 and 4 years old, so probably didn't have much of an idea of what was going on. Even compared with today's most excessive events, think billionaire engagement parties, they don't even come close to the scale and lavishness of this event, which by multiple surviving reports was really rather excessive. A temporary palace was erected, and you can see these depictions. It's an oil painting below, dated just a few years after the event, which is in the Royal Collection, which depicts this temporary palace, which was erected with a brick base and walls of cloth on carved and painted timber frames. And the cloth was painted very cleverly by the best artists of the time to appear like stone or brick walls and to appear like a lead roof. Red wine flowed from 2 fountains. There were musical productions and choirs with music composed for this event. Each royal entourage included hundreds of servants, knights, horses, and priests. And thousands of cloth tents were erected to house guests. And you can see there are multiple tents in this painting, which goes on, on and on in the distance of the valley. And perhaps that's one of the fountains spurting red wine in the foreground there. King Henry actually came with 2 royal monkeys covered in gold leaf. So there's an aspiration for a party feature. So although a spectacular sight, which made a really lasting impression on contemporaries, overall, according to the history books, it was not really a political success, this event. The tournament rules stated that the two kings would not compete against one another, but King Henry challenged Francis to a wrestling match. Sounds quite true to his character. And when he lost, then turned quite sour. And the meeting was also a diplomatic failure. After the event, Anglo-Franco relations quickly became hostile. Henry broke off the engagement in 1521 after Francis invaded Navarre and the Low Countries. And only a year later, the nations were at war. So it was a fairly temporary kind of event around political friendships that did not last. And it's fair to say that the depiction of this tournament in the stained glass window at Lowestoft Town Hall doesn't quite match the descriptions of this event. Perhaps it could be a bit more golden, but you can see there's an attempt to show the jousting, the spectators, there's castles and tents, and the kind of hilly background of the valley of Calais. And the scale of this scene and the whole painting technique, actually, which is made using a different type of stained glass. It's painted colour on clear glass rather than the rest of the window, which is predominantly pieces of coloured glass held together with lead. It differentiates this scene from the rest of the window, which I think is entirely deliberate because it kind of appears as a central scene, like a portal onto the past. And we look straight into the action there. So you have a knight on horseback on the left with his lance outstretched. And it looks like this may be the moment before a decisive victory over his component, who's just visible behind a wall of reeds. It's slightly small here, but I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is the other jousting knight on the other side of the fence made of reeds. And this rapid movement of the knight, the speed at which he's galloping on this horse, has caused this other horse to kind of leap up in fright. You can see this horse is also moving. And crowds of men and women, courtiers and monks, all in this kind of Renaissance costume, are watching the action from both sides, both up here and also across here. As for perspective, it's quite a simple depiction. It's a linear attempt at drawing, and this is very much exaggerated by the horizontal lead lines, which kind of break the piece into different panels or sections that have been painted and then leaded up together. The immediacy of this scene and its prominence in the window reminds us that in many ways the international exhibitions were the 19th century equivalents to medieval tournaments. Both were sites of supposedly civilized international competition in which nations jostled for success and prowess in an environment that was filled with pomp and ceremony, symbolic displays of national pride, and also international peace, but often underlined by quite serious things like war as well. And this was a comparison that did not go unnoticed in the 19th century when this window was exhibited to international crowds. So during the exhibition, Contemporary article talked about this window and used the Field of the Cloth of Gold tournament as an analogy to comment upon the challenge that the French display of fine arts at the exhibition presented to English artists. So it reported that France has fearlessly thrown down their barriers, calling every nation to run a tilt with her in this new Field of the Cloth of Gold. An Englishman is only true to his role when he admits the results, however distasteful, of fair play and straightforward competition. And the Field of the Cloth of Gold was used here as a kind of literary device, really, to assess the success of British exhibits against their French competition. But it also adopted a renewed significance during the Gothic revival period, which occurred in the 19th century, when depictions of medieval chivalry were abundant and very popular. So although the representation of this tournament in this stained glass window is the only surviving stained glass window depicting this event that I know of, there were others that were made, notably one in 1830 made by Thomas Wilmshurst that depicted the Field of the Cloth of Gold, but it was destroyed by fire and no longer survives. The subjects, however, continued to be popular throughout the century, and a stained glass panel depicting the tournament was also displayed at the Exposition Universelle of 1900. But again, I don't have any visual references to show you what that window looked like. So here, the representation of this tournament in this window had both local and international significance. It may have been included because Sir Richard Jerningham, who died in 1525, was, I believe, one of the lords of the manor of Somerleyton, and he is said to have distinguished himself at the tournament by being one of the jousting knights. So perhaps it's partly a reference to the history of Somerleyton Hall. But it also seems that it is perhaps less obviously, but I think there's a strong argument here that it also alluded to the more recent event of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert visiting France in 1843 during the reign of King Louis Philippe, just a few years before the exhibition. And why am I talking about this? Well, it was quite a momentous occasion when Queen Victoria did go over to France, because it was the first time that a reigning British monarch had actually visited France since Henry VIII's tournament in 1520. So several hundred years had passed when England and France did not get on very well at all. King Louis Philippe reigned until 1848, the year of the French Revolution, which marked the end of his reign when he abdicated and the July monarchy collapsed. And Napoleon III of the Bonaparte family became the first president of France. He re-established the French Empire following a coup in 1851, and it was after this time actually that the relationship between the British monarch Queen Victoria and the Emperor Napoleon blossomed, and several more royal visits took place over the following years, culminating in a series of visits in 1855, which of course was the year of the Paris Exposition Universelle. So you can see here how these events were commemorated through art. We've got a painting at the top of Queen Victoria meeting Louis Philippe, perhaps on the boat that they arrived on, and below there, the reception of Queen Victoria at Boulogne-sur-Mer, before the commercial ferries were in operation in 1855. And there she would have been received by Napoleon. And this is suggested, of course, by the cameo presence of both monarchs in the window at Lowestoft. So during Napoleon's visit to London in 1855, because there were reciprocal visits, Victoria and Albert took him and Emperor Napoleon and Empress Eugenie to the recently resurrected Crystal Palace at Sydenham. This was the building that was built in Hyde Park for the Great Exhibition of 1851, and a few years later re-erected in a slightly different form at Sydenham. So you can see here the emperor and the monarch sat together in this painting. And they also went to the Royal Italian Opera, as depicted in this black and white lithograph, which interestingly, you will note, is entitled Hail Happy Union. Those same words appear in the stained glass window. And the following August, in 1855, this is in April when Emperor Napoleon and Eugenie come to London. The following August, Victoria and Albert go to Paris, and they spend 10 days there, visiting many sites of interest, but also the Exposition Universelle, where they spent 2 days at the exhibition going round, and probably could have spent more because that's how vast they were. So the meetings between the monarchs of Britain and France at this time were really well documented and illustrated in the 19th century press, as you've seen. And here is Victoria arm in arm with Napoleon. And actually, this whole relationship was the subject of an exhibition several years ago in France at the Château de Compiègne. And popular magazine Punch, which I guess is more like the kind of mock the week in print thing of the time, took quite a satirical approach to the developing friendship. And you can see on the left here, they published a caricature entitled La Belle Alliance on the 1st of September 1855. And this is the illustration on the left, where you can see that Victoria is shown petting the French eagle seated on his perch, while Eugenie, the consort of Napoleon, pets the muzzle of the British lion, and Prince Albert lights Napoleon's cigar. So, really, really great stuff here. By contrast to all these kind of depictions of these meetings, whether satirical or intended to be reporting journalism, Peto's window kind of more straightforwardly commemorates this strategic alliance. As one review noted, the window was an a propos production intended to perpetuate the amity and friendship of two states at the head of modern civilization and refinement. And the window really paid tribute to these grand empires of England and France. But the window's association with a Victorian entrepreneur, Sir Samuel Morton Peto, enables us to further break down this image and examine it more as a reference to his own status and also his commercial self-interests. He was an enterprising individual. Remember, he was a building contractor. And it was at the Houses of Parliament that Peto likely came into contact with the artist John Thomas, shown on the left here, who was actually primarily an architect and sculptor, but we know was the designer of this stained glass window. And as far as I know, this is the only window that we know was designed by him. He also would have come into contact through working at the Houses of Parliament with the Edinburgh stained glass artist James Ballantyne, who's shown in that photograph on the right, the left-hand individual. Ballantyne and Sons were a stained glass firm in Edinburgh, and they had won the competition to design the stained glass windows for the House of Lords. So Peto enlisted both John Thomas and Ballantyne and Sons to work on windows at his home at Somerleyton, and of course both were involved in the design and manufacture of the window now at Lowestoft Town Hall. Peto, around 1840, had seen the potential in railway construction and kind of moved on from kind of managing things like Nelson's Column to railway engineering, and leading to a situation in which just within 10 years, his contracting firm, Peto and Grizzly, had 33 domestic railway contracts, which were worth £20 million. This was the largest number held by any single contractor in the UK. And of course, this is an enormous time of railway expansion. I'm just giving you a sense here through these illustrations throughout just 3 decades of the railway expansion in the UK, from start of Queen Victoria's reign in 1837 up to 1860. And Peto was involved in a lot of these. For our purposes this evening, he developed especially the East Anglian Railway line that ran between Norwich and Great Yarmouth, 1842 to 44, and another connecting Lowestoft to Norwich, which provided links between Lowestoft, the Midlands, and the North. He also made London and the South accessible by creating a link to Ipswich and developing a harbour which introduced a cross-North Sea trade between Lowestoft and Denmark. And this accounts for various street names actually quite close to the station, which refer to Denmark or Danish places in Denmark. So all these new connections, railway and harbour, really enabled the expansion and growth of the town of Lowestoft, which is one of the most easterly points of East Anglia. And the fishing industry in particular really benefited. And the railway also aided the development of coastal tourism following the new resort built to the south of the harbour. And as many of you will know, the town's population really more than quadrupled in 50 years, going from around 4,000 in the early 1840s to almost 20,000 in the 1890s. And as well as developing railways locally and across the UK, in the 1850s, Peto's firm actually began building railways abroad. And one of the most significant of these was the Grand Crimean Central Railway. This was built upon Peto's suggestion and at cost price. He built it in cooperation actually with his main rivals, Thomas Brassey and Edward Betts, to assist the campaign in the Crimea. Here is an image of this railway that was built in the Crimea. I mean, it was clearly a combined effort to aid the war because he worked with his rivals, but it was also a commercially good thing for him to do, even if it was built at cost price, because it really put his name out there. The Crimean War, also known as the 10th Russo-Turkish War, was one of many Ottoman wars which kind of marks the decline of the Ottoman Empire. And actually, Napoleon III of France and the Russian Tsar Nicholas I went to war, and Britain joined as French allies because they also wanted to preserve the Ottoman Empire and to maintain a balance of power in that area. But this railway at Balaklava was the first railway built solely for military purposes. So it's a really important moment in history. It was an 8-mile track between Balaklava and Sevastopol. Sevastopol was where the Russian main naval base was, and they built it in just 6.5 weeks. The Battle of Balaklava, which is where the Tennyson poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, is all about this battle, was a Russian counterattack following the siege of Sevastopol. And here is one of the many depictions of the Light Brigade charging in here. But the railway line, which you can see here, actually the navvies, so the builders building the line at Balaklava, was used to transport supplies to the troops at the front line. And it also carried the first hospital train, which again was a real first, and made a massive difference. So the railway was a major factor in the success of the siege of Sevastopol, up until which point the Allied troops had suffered really quite large losses. And after this siege, the new Tsar eventually opened peace negotiations, and the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1856, ending this war. So in this context then, the presence of Peto's window in Paris in 1855 which is during the Crimean War, reminded visitors of the kind of imperial alliance and the imperial motives as well underlying the ongoing campaign, without addressing the brutal reality of what was kind of bloody battles and decimation of soldiers. The imagery and the inscriptions, these things that say "Hail, Happy Union, Forever United, Guardians of Europe," they all present an idealized depiction of this Anglo-Franco alliance that was further pronounced by its presence in that palace of industry, which Napoleon himself had christened the Temple of Peace. And the projection of such ideologies through stained glass, which is an artistic medium reliant on light and often associated with the church, with divinity, with divine light, further validated these campaigns to many. And one can only imagine actually how this window appeared as a kick in the teeth to those Russian officers who had been defeated and captured at Sevastopol, and who were brought back to Paris and allowed to attend the exposition free of charge before being returned to their stockades. So there's all sorts of complex and interesting things are going on when we think about who might have viewed this window, how might they have felt at the time. We're very much looking at this through a kind of historian's lens. The window also clearly commemorated Peto's personal involvement in the Crimean campaign. When he decided to build the railway, in Crimea, he had to step down from Parliament because it was a bit of a conflict. And as some compensation, he was awarded a baronetcy just 3 months before the opening of the exposition. So he became a Sir in 1855 during the course of this exhibition. And Peto did actually rely on British and French imperial rule to expand his railway empire. So we might look at this through the slightly sceptical lens. In addition to building railways in Norway and France, Denmark, Austria, Hungary, Argentina, and Russia after the Crimean War, Peto also constructed railways in the British colonies of Canada and Australia. Of course, they were then British colonies, and at the time, the French colony of Algeria, where Peto actually accompanied Napoleon III to the opening of the railway line. So again, very close relationships with key political figures. And this reminds us of the economic motives and perhaps the status attached to Peto and that he attached maybe to this window. We're also reminded of kind of economic motives and financial rewards of this alliance between Britain and France by the inclusion of portraits of the British and French monarchs in the window in the form of cameo busts. Cameo busts, of course, are a form that's been an art form that's been valued since antiquity, but in the modern era, more commonly associated with and widely used as an economic currency in the form of coins and medals. And I'm showing you here on the right, actually the cameo portraits that I think these stained glass depictions are based on, which is a medal commemorating Napoleon III's visit to England in 1855, the same year as this window. So it was very, very up to date, very of the moment, all of the imagery in this window. And although a rather obscure mix of iconography and symbolism, it clearly articulates a particular point in history. So was it really a happy union? Well, I think underpinning what is, a bit of a propagandistic image of a happy union of Britain and France are clearly some individual business and commercial interests of Peto, who was a successful, and I think you have to be opportunistic to be successful entrepreneur. His income relied on the industrial innovation and development of an international trade, and he used the exhibition as an opportunity to show his allegiance to the British and French monarchs and to celebrate his own achievements, as well as those of the nation in the Crimean campaign. But it's really interesting that he chose stained glass as the medium in which to express these propagandist sentiments. Whilst the medium of stained glass came with powerful and medieval associations, Peto's own fortune, like the revival of stained glass more broadly, had depended upon these technologies of iron and glass, characteristic of the Victorian railways and architecture. And glass, as we know, is a fragile material. And one can see that over the times this window is more than 150 years old, cracks have appeared in several parts of this window, notably in the central panel depicting the tournament, but also in the crossed flags of Britain and France. And these have been repaired with these extra mending leads that you see kind of spidered across the panel. And like glass, international relations are, of course, also susceptible to be damaged, broken, weakened, changed over time. The tournament of the Field of the Cloth of Gold did not last very long. It was temporary, as was actually the mid-19th century Anglo-French alliance, because some 40 years after the Crimean War, when Britain and France had fought alongside one another, France and Britain went head-to-head in the Fashoda incident of 1898, which was a territorial dispute over imperial expansion in Africa. And by the 1900 Exposition Universelle in Paris, France's positive relationship with its former enemy Russia was celebrated at the inauguration of the Pont Alexandre Bridge, which is dedicated to the Russian Tsar Alexander III. So, these things are not stable, they are changing. And as many of you will probably know, Peto's own success was similarly short-lived. His firm actually got into quite serious debt in the 1860s after failed investment in the London, Chatham and Dover Railway, and he suffered a bit of national humiliation when he became bankrupt in 1868, which again forced him to step down from his parliamentary role as MP for Bristol, as he was at the time. So although his legacy lives on today through this window in Lowestoft Town Hall and various recognition locally across the railway stations of East Anglia, Peto actually died in relative obscurity and is buried in the churchyard of Tunbridge Wells, where he lived in the later years of his life. And here is the tomb to his life, his tomb in the burial churchyard at Tunbridge Wells. So I hope I haven't spoken for too long. There's quite a lot of history there, and I'm very happy to welcome John back and see if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Jasmine. Thanks for your presentation. Yeah, I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so I suppose if you'd like to, if anybody would like to ask a question, if you just use the raise hand function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. I did have a question myself, actually.
Yeah, that's fine. And I also say if people have comments or corrections, please also put those in, because
sure.
this is a subject I've kind of revisited and very much coming from the kind of stained glass lens, not a historian. So yeah, it would be great to understand things better if I haven't portrayed it correctly. But yeah, your question.
So I guess generally I was wondering what would the reaction and the response have been among the general public, in particular in Lowestoft, to the stained glass window? Would it have almost been like the effect of colour cinema for the first time a few generations later?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know that I have any like evidence about the reaction. I mean, I haven't trawled through all the local papers, and maybe someone would like to do that. That would be really interesting. I'm sure the project would be pleased too. There is an article in The Builder, which is a popular journal which reports on lots of building across the country, and it talks about the opening of Lowestoft Town Hall, and the windows are mentioned, but and this one is described a little, but it doesn't talk, of course, about what the average person thought. I mean, by then, stained glass is very, very popular, so it's appearing in churches and wealthy people's houses everywhere. So it's a very fashionable art form. So they would have been used to seeing stained glass and delighted in the colour, but they would have not been used to seeing such imagery because it would mostly be church glass. So I think this is really unusual in that sense. And clearly the town hall, made it a really prominent feature. I would love to really understand better, and I don't know whether the archives shed light on this, but how the window came about, whether the town hall was always in mind, or whether this was a kind of self-commissioned project that then ended up being given to the town hall when the town hall was being built. And again, that's a really interesting thing, because I can't think of any other example if it is that way round. It's much more likely that a building is decided and then someone gives some money for a stained glass window, So that would be really interesting, and I think, to find out about that. It is really, there is, like I said, it's a unique iconography. If you go to a church, you'll see the same kind of depictions of saints and biblical stories over and over. They get repeated across the country and change slightly, but mostly you get repeated imagery. This is something that I think is completely unique. It's quite gaudy. The colours are quite gaudy. So I'd be interested to know whether people actually like it as an artwork. I think it's obviously fascinating and interesting, but is it successful as an artwork? And be interested to know what people think about it.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of which came first, I suppose. Yeah, we have a question from Jess. So yeah, I just
thought I'd answer Jasmine's question about the inscription on the other windows. It says a memento of the warm interest taken in the prosperity of the town by Sir S. Morton Peto, Baronet, MP. So yes, yeah. And just to say that the bust of Peto is safely in storage, and we aim to install it back in the town hall council
Great.
chamber once the town hall's redeveloped as well.
Great. Sorry, so it's not in the museum, it's in the town hall collection still. Yeah, great.
Yes, yeah.
And
yeah,
yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I've been a bit mean on Peto actually. I've been a bit skeptical, but he, of course, what he did for the local area was lots of acts of generosity too, and that is clearly recognised by the town in that window. And I imagine those other two were kind of made as an extension of the gift that of the main window. You know, they are different in colouring and style, and I think they are later.
thank you. Right. And this is just the first of our town hall talks. We do have a number of others coming up. So we have myself, you'll have to listen to me talking about the history of the town hall site, and that's on December the 11th. We have Ivan Bunn, local historian, talking about the Lowestoft witches and the witch trial that happened. That's in January. And we have Leo Wistock, who will be talking to us about the Royal Naval Patrol Service Museum, about the Royal Naval Patrol Service and how it came into existence in February as well. Yeah, John, pass over to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Jasmine, for your time and your interesting talk. Yeah, so, and thank you for everybody for attending as well, and hope you enjoyed, and see you at the next talk.